In Phillips County, Arkansas, 8 white men believed they had fathered the same child. That autumn of 1857, each received an identical letter, written in careful script, claiming paternity and demanding protection for a newborn. What made this extraordinary wasn't just the deception, but that the woman who orchestrated it was enslaved, illiterate, and according to surviving records, had never been taught to write. The letters were too similar for coincidence, too specific in detail to be forgeries, and too dangerous to ignore in a society where such accusations could destroy families, end political careers, and ignite violence capable of consuming entire communities. By the time authorities began investigating, 3 of the men had already made arrangements to purchase the woman's freedom. 2 had confronted each other with loaded pistols, and 1 had vanished entirely from Phillips County, abandoning his plantation and wife without explanation. The case was buried so thoroughly it never appeared in newspapers, never reached a courtroom, and was deliberately excluded from official county histories, preserved only in private correspondence and plantation ledgers not meant to survive. Before we continue with the story of Phillips County's most dangerous woman, I want to ask you something. This channel brings you the darkest, most carefully researched mysteries from American history, stories that were deliberately hidden and almost lost to time. If you're hearing this, you're part of a community that refuses to let these stories disappear. Take a moment right now to subscribe to Liturgy of Fear. And down in the comments, tell me what state or city you're listening from. I want to know where our community of truth seekers is growing. Now, let's discover together how one enslaved woman in 1857 Arkansas managed to deceive 8 men, manipulate an entire county's power structure, and nearly escaped slavery through a scheme so intricate historians still debate whether she acted alone. The autumn of 1857 would become known among certain families in Phillips County as the season of reckoning, though none would ever speak of it publicly. Stretched along the Mississippi River's western bank, Phillips County, Arkansas, was where the water ran brown with soil from 1,000 miles upstream, and the land lay flat and fertile under skies that turned the color of brass in summer heat. Organized only 23 years earlier from territory that had belonged to the Quapaw people until forced removal, by 1857 it had transformed into one of the wealthiest cotton-producing regions in the state. The population numbered just over 8,000 souls, though that figure depended entirely on whether one counted enslaved people as souls or property, a distinction that mattered greatly in census records, and not at all in daily life. The county seat, Helena, perched on a bluff overlooking the river, its warehouses stuffed with cotton bales waiting for steamboats churning upstream from New Orleans. Named for a land speculator's daughter, the town retained a speculative quality, a sense that fortunes could be made or lost in a single growing season, that a man's status depended on his cotton yield, his enslaved workforce, and his ability to manage both without appearing to exert effort. 3 churches served the white population, their steeples competing for dominance over the skyline. 2 hotels accommodated travelers and traders. 1 newspaper, the Helena Shield, published weekly editorials about states' rights, cotton prices, and the superiority of Southern civilization. The Quapaw Quarter, as locals still called the area south of Helena despite the absence of any Quapaw, contained some of Arkansas's most productive plantations. The soil was especially rich here, the drainage especially good, and the men who owned the land especially wealthy. Their names appeared in state legislature records, bank charters, and steamboat company manifests. They served on county commissions, church boards, and militia committees. They married each other's sisters and cousins, educated their sons at colleges in Virginia and South Carolina, and maintained a social order that seemed as permanent and natural as the river itself. Among the enslaved population of Phillips County, information moved through networks invisible to white oversight. News traveled from field to kitchen, kitchen to stable, stable to dock, dock to another plantation's field, creating a secondary circulatory system of knowledge that white owners preferred to believe didn't exist. They told themselves their enslaved workers were content, loyal, simple-minded, incapable of complex thought or coordinated action. This willful blindness would make possible what happened next. The woman known to county records only as Celia belonged to Hamilton Drury, a cotton planter whose holdings encompassed nearly 2,000 acres south of Helena. Drury had purchased Celia in 1851 from an estate sale in Chickett County, acquiring her along with 7 others when the previous owner's debts exceeded his assets. The bill of sale described her as approximately 19 years old, healthy, suitable for field or housework, and noted without further detail that she had been trained in textile production. The price paid, $475, suggested she was considered neither particularly valuable nor defective, an unremarkable acquisition for a man who bought and sold human beings with the same attention he gave to purchasing mules or farming equipment. Hamilton Drury was 41 years old in 1857, married to a woman named Margaret who had given him 4 daughters, a source of persistent disappointment he rarely bothered to conceal. His plantation, Riverbend, employed an overseer named Virgil Tucker, who managed day-to-day operations while Drury attended to business in Helena and maintained social obligations essential to his status. Tucker was a lean, hard man from Tennessee who had learned plantation management in the cotton counties along the Mississippi and believed that violence, efficiently applied, prevented the necessity of more violence later. He carried a blacksnake whip coiled on his belt and used it with casual regularity, though never enough to damage valuable property beyond its ability to work. By 1857, Celia worked primarily in the plantation house, having been transferred from field labor after Margaret Drury noticed her careful hands and quick understanding of instruction. She cleaned, cooked, served at table, and performed the invisible labor that maintained the appearance of effortless white comfort. She spoke when spoken to, kept her eyes down in the presence of white people, and had learned to make herself unremarkable, a skill that required constant attention and considerable intelligence. But Celia possessed something far more dangerous than intelligence alone. She understood patterns. She watched how men behaved when they believed themselves unobserved, how they justified their actions, how they revealed their fears and desires through small gestures and unguarded words. She had learned to read not letters on a page, but the deeper grammar of power, violence, and self-deception that structured Southern society. And she had realized something that would change the trajectory of her life and nearly unravel the social order of Phillips County. The men who owned and controlled everything were also the most vulnerable to certain kinds of manipulation because their power depended on maintaining appearances that were fundamentally fraudulent. The scheme that would later shock Phillips County began forming in Celia's mind sometime in early 1857, though the exact genesis remains impossible to determine. What is certain, based on later testimony and preserved correspondence, is that by March of that year she had identified 8 specific men who could be exploited, had analyzed their individual vulnerabilities, and had begun the careful, dangerous work of making each believe he had a secret relationship with her. The 8 men came from different situations but shared crucial characteristics. All were white. All were property owners or men of business. All had reputations to protect, and all had access to Celia through the normal operation of plantation society. They were not strangers or outliers, but respected members of the community, men whose word carried weight and whose social position seemed unassailable. Hamilton Drury was the obvious first target, given his ownership and the access it provided. But Celia's plan required more than one man, more than one potential claim of paternity. It required a web of conflicting interests, mutual suspicion, and shared guilt that would make exposure dangerous for everyone involved. The second man was Josiah Frell, who owned the plantation adjacent to Riverbend. 53 and childless despite 2 marriages, Frell was known for his regular visits to Drury's property under the pretense of discussing cotton markets and river commerce. He was also known, though only among the enslaved community, for his habit of walking the property lines at dusk and his attention to women working in the fields nearest his land. The third was Virgil Tucker, the overseer, whose position gave him authority over every enslaved person at Riverbend and whose cruelty was matched only by his dependence on his employment. Tucker had no property of his own, no family in Arkansas, and no prospects beyond his current position. He was in many ways the most dangerous and the most vulnerable of the 8. The fourth was Samuel Pritchard, a cotton factor in Helena who arranged sales and credit for multiple plantations, including Riverbend. 38 and married to a woman from a wealthy Memphis family, Pritchard visited frequently to review accounts, inspect warehouses, and assess crop quality. He cultivated political ambitions that required an absolutely spotless reputation. The fifth was Dr. James Rankin, physician to several plantations in the Quapaw Quarter. 45 and a widower, Rankin made regular calls to Riverbend, treating illnesses among the enslaved workforce with the same dispassionate efficiency he applied to valuable livestock. He was known for his discreet handling of sensitive medical matters. The sixth was Reverend Thomas Hartwell, minister of the Presbyterian Church in Helena, who occasionally visited plantations to preach to enslaved congregations, a practice considered both pious and useful for maintaining social control. 32 and recently arrived from Virginia, Hartwell was eager to establish himself as a moral authority in his new community. The seventh was William Dvor, a riverboat captain who transported cotton from Helena to New Orleans and whose boat, the Delta Star, docked regularly at Riverbend Landing. 41 and unmarried, Dvor spent more time on the river than on land, a man whose mobility made him both useful and difficult to track. The eighth was Benjamin Yates, a lawyer in Helena who handled property transfers, estate settlements, and contract disputes for the county's planter class. 36, married, and father of 3 sons, Yates was known for his meticulous attention to documentation and legal precedent. What Celia understood with remarkable psychological insight was that each of these men had already crossed certain boundaries in their minds, had already rationalized behaviors that society officially condemned but privately tolerated. The institution of slavery created opportunities for white men to act on desires that would be unthinkable in other contexts, opportunities exercised far more frequently than anyone acknowledged publicly. The enslaved woman who resisted could be beaten, sold, or killed. The enslaved woman who submitted was simply fulfilling her role in a system that defined her as property without will or rights. But Celia wasn't planning to resist or submit. She was planning to weaponize the very system that oppressed her, to turn the mechanisms of power against themselves by exploiting the one thing that could threaten these men: exposure of their hypocrisy, documentation of their violations, and public acknowledgement of truths that everyone knew but no one could afford to speak. The execution of Celia's plan required patience, precision, and an understanding of timing that bordered on genius. She needed each man to believe he alone had a secret relationship with her, that she was somehow complicit in or even desirous of his attention, and that their interactions were private and unobserved. This required creating opportunities for each to approach her, responding in ways that encouraged continued contact without triggering suspicion, and establishing in each man's mind the plausible possibility that he might have fathered a child. With Hamilton Drury, the pattern was already established. He had asserted his claimed rights as owner from the beginning, and Celia's position in the plantation house made resistance impossible and escape unlikely. But she began modifying her responses, seeming less resistant, creating the impression she had developed feelings that made Drury's actions seem less like violence and more like a relationship. This required extraordinary self-control and psychological manipulation, transforming trauma into theater, survival into strategy. With Josiah Frell, she created opportunities during his visits to Riverbend, making herself visible when Drury was occupied elsewhere, establishing eye contact that could be interpreted as invitation, allowing herself to be found alone in locations where Frell's presence could seem accidental. When Frell finally approached her directly in the tobacco barn in late April, she responded with calculated ambiguity, neither refusing nor enthusiastically accepting, creating the impression of a woman who was conflicted but ultimately willing. With Virgil Tucker, the approach was different because the power dynamic was different. Tucker already believed he could take whatever he wanted from any enslaved woman under his authority. But Celia made him believe she preferred his attention to Drury's, that she saw him as stronger and more desirable. This required criticizing Drury in subtle ways when alone with Tucker, comparing them favorably to Tucker, creating the illusion of genuine attraction. Tucker, whose position made him despised by the enslaved community and isolated from white society, was particularly susceptible. With Samuel Pritchard, she used his vanity and fear of social exposure. Pritchard considered himself more refined than the plantation owners he served, more educated and sophisticated. When he visited Riverbend in May, Celia made sure to demonstrate she could read numbers in his account books, understand complex transactions, recognize the quality of his clothing and the newness of his watch chain. For a man who spent his days flattering wealthy clients, the attention of an enslaved woman who seemed to admire his accomplishments was intoxicating precisely because it required no performance, no calculation of social advantage. With Dr. Rankin, she exploited his professional distance and isolation as a widower. When he examined her during a routine medical inspection in June, she asked questions about medicine and health that suggested intelligence and curiosity, creating a connection that felt intellectual rather than physical, though it inevitably led to the same place. Rankin convinced himself he was educating her, that their interactions were somehow elevated and different from the crude violations practiced by men like Tucker. With Reverend Hartwell, the manipulation was most delicate and dangerous. Hartwell visited Riverbend in early July to preach to the enslaved congregation, delivering a sermon about obedience and Christian duty that Celia endured with apparent attention. Afterward, she approached him with questions about salvation and biblical interpretation, creating the impression of spiritual hunger that Hartwell found irresistible. He began visiting specifically to continue these conversations, which gradually shifted from theology to more personal matters. Hartwell convinced himself he was saving her soul, even as he violated every moral principle he preached. With William Dvor, the riverboat captain, Celia used his mobility and separation from land-based social structures. When the Delta Star docked at Riverbend in late July, she made sure to be visible on the landing, helping load supplies and giving Dvor the impression she was free to move about with minimal supervision. Dvor, who spent most of his time surrounded by male crew members and whose visits to ports were hurried and anonymous, found the possibility of a recurring connection with the same woman appealing in ways he hadn't anticipated. With Benjamin Yates, the lawyer, Celia exploited his professional pride and need to appear exceptional. When Yates visited Riverbend in August to review property documents, she managed to be present, appearing to dust or straighten furniture but actually paying attention to the legal language he used, the way he organized documents, the logic of his arguments. When she asked him a question about property law, pretending confusion but demonstrating she understood the basic principle, Yates was flattered in a way that led him to seek further conversations, which led inevitably to further contact. What made the scheme brilliant was not just the individual manipulations, but the timing. Celia had calculated that for her plan to work, each man needed to believe he had been with her during a period when pregnancy could have resulted. This required compressing the timeline, making all 8 believe they had exclusive access during roughly the same 2-month period in summer 1857. It required extraordinary care about visibility, ensuring each believed his interactions were secret while actually creating a situation where all 8 were acting on the same assumption of exclusivity. By late August, Celia was able to announce, first to the women of the enslaved community at Riverbend, then carefully and separately to each of the 8 men, that she was pregnant. The news spread through the plantation's enslaved community with the speed of all-important information, moving from house to quarters, quarters to fields, generating speculation and concern. Pregnancy for an enslaved woman meant many things: temporary reduction in work demands or increased surveillance and restriction, a child enslaved from birth or, in rare cases, leverage that might lead to freedom if the father was white and powerful enough to care. But what made this pregnancy immediately remarkable to the women who knew Celia best was her quiet confidence, the sense she had planned this rather than endured it, that she saw the pregnancy not as another form of exploitation, but as an opportunity she had created. To each of the 8 men, delivered separately in circumstances ensuring privacy, Celia revealed her pregnancy as a secret only he knew, presenting it as both burden and opportunity, a problem requiring his help and a connection binding them together. She was careful never to demand anything immediately, never to threaten exposure, but simply to state the fact and observe the reaction, letting each man's guilt, fear, or vanity drive his response. Hamilton Drury's reaction was initially dismissive. Enslaved women had children constantly, and paternity was irrelevant under law. Any child born to Celia would belong to him as property regardless of biological parentage. But Celia's response introduced a complication. She mentioned, as if casually, that others had noticed her pregnancy and might speculate about the father, Margaret Drury's sharp eyes and suspicious nature, servants talking among themselves, information sometimes reaching mistresses through channels masters couldn't control. Drury's dismissiveness transformed into unease. Josiah Frell's reaction was immediate alarm. Childless despite 2 marriages, he had begun accepting that his property would pass to distant relatives after his death. The possibility he had fathered a child, even one enslaved, awakened something both proprietary and sentimental. But he was also terrified of his current wife discovering his behavior. He pressed Celia for assurance she had told no one else, that she would keep their relationship secret, that she understood the danger of speaking about the child's paternity. Virgil Tucker's reaction was the most immediately violent. He grabbed Celia's arm hard enough to leave bruises, demanding to know if she had been with anyone else, if she was trying to trap him into responsibility for another man's child. But Celia's response, delivered without fear despite his grip, turned his anger into uncertainty. She looked directly at him, something enslaved people rarely did, and asked why he thought she would risk telling him if it weren't true. She reminded him she had nothing to gain from lying, that she was putting herself in danger by telling him at all. Tucker released her arm, his certainty shaken. Samuel Pritchard's reaction revealed his social anxiety. He immediately calculated potential damage to his reputation, political ambitions, and marriage to a woman whose family connections had advanced his business. He asked multiple times whether anyone else knew, whether she had written to anyone, whether she had told anyone in Helena. The questions revealed his awareness that enslaved people formed communication networks white people preferred to ignore, and his fear that information about his behavior might already be circulating in ways he couldn't control. Dr. James Rankin's reaction was clinical initially, then shifted to something conflicted. He examined Celia to confirm the pregnancy, using professional authority to touch her in ways that seemed medical but weren't, then sat in silence before speaking. He told her she needed careful health management, that he would ensure proper nutrition and reduced work demands. He didn't ask about other possible fathers, simply accepting with the fatalism of a man who had lost one wife and never recovered that he had created this situation and bore responsibility. Reverend Thomas Hartwell's reaction was psychologically complex. He began praying aloud, asking for God's guidance, speaking about sin and redemption while simultaneously reaching out to touch Celia's face with tenderness, contradicting the violence of everything he had done. He told her they would find a way through this trial, that God tested his servants but provided deliverance. He seemed genuinely unable to recognize the contradiction between theological certainty and personal behavior, existing in two separate mental spaces that never touched or acknowledged each other. William Dvore's reaction was shaped by his mobility. He immediately calculated distances and timing, asking when she had last seen her monthly courses, calculating backward to determine if the timeline matched his visits. Satisfied it was possible, his response was pragmatic. He told her he would help, that he had money saved, that they could make arrangements when he returned from New Orleans. He viewed the situation as a transaction manageable with sufficient resources and planning. Benjamin Yates's reaction revealed the legal mind. He began asking questions to establish facts, what evidence existed, who knew what information, what claims could be proven. But underneath the professional questioning, Celia sensed genuine fear. Yates understood how easily reputation could be destroyed, how a whisper could become testimony, how private behavior could become public scandal. He told her she must tell no one else, must wait for him to consider the situation and develop a proper response. By September 1857, Celia had created a situation unique in Phillips County's history. 8 white men, powerful in their respective spheres, all convinced they had fathered the same unborn child. None knew about the others. Each believed he alone shared this dangerous secret. And each was realizing that maintaining that secret required taking actions that would draw attention, raise questions, and potentially expose them to the scrutiny they most feared. The genius lay in timing and understanding of male psychology. By making each believe he was the only one, Celia created 8 separate crises. By connecting each man's guilt to his deepest vulnerability, social reputation, political ambition, professional standing, or personal vanity, she ensured high motivation to solve the problem she presented. And by being enslaved, she created a situation where any solution benefiting her would require extraordinary, visible, potentially contradictory actions. What Celia needed was for these men to begin acting on their individual fears and desires in ways that would inevitably bring them into conflict, creating a situation where exposure became a mutual threat and silence impossible. October brought cooler weather to Phillips County, and with it the first sign Celia's scheme was manifesting. 3 of the 8 men, acting independently, initiated legal and financial processes to purchase an enslaved woman's freedom. The first to move was Dr. James Rankin. On October 7, he visited Benjamin Yates's law office requesting assistance preparing documents to purchase Celia from Hamilton Drury and subsequently manumit her. Yates, with his own concerns about Celia, maintained professional composure but understood the implications. He asked if Drury had agreed, if a price was negotiated. Rankin responded he hadn't yet approached Drury but wanted documents prepared to present a complete proposal. Yates prepared the documents but filed a copy in his personal records, a detail later proving significant. He also sent a note to his clerk to monitor any other inquiries about purchasing or manumitting enslaved people from Riverbend, a precaution suggesting Yates suspected something unusual. The second to move was Samuel Pritchard. On October 9, just 2 days after Rankin's visit, Pritchard approached Drury directly during a business visit to Riverbend. He mentioned, as if casually, that a cotton factor in Memphis was looking to purchase a house servant for his wife, a woman who could cook, clean, and manage household affairs. He suggested Celia might be suitable, that the Memphis factor would pay a premium, and that it might benefit Drury since house servants were less profitable than field hands in cotton country. Drury, with no intention of selling Celia, took note and began wondering why Pritchard was suddenly interested. The third was Reverend Thomas Hartwell. On October 12, he visited Riverbend under pretext of discussing church expansion fundraising but found opportunity to speak privately with Margaret Drury about Christian charity and soul redemption. He mentioned being particularly moved by the spiritual development of one enslaved woman at Riverbend, her remarkable aptitude for Scripture, and that he contemplated whether the church might purchase her freedom as an example of Christian mercy. Margaret, devout and never consulted about such matters, was flattered by Hartwell's attention but suspicious of his specific interest. By mid-October, Hamilton Drury had 3 separate inquiries about purchasing or freeing Celia, each from respected citizens with apparently reasonable justification, arriving within 5 days. Drury was not stupid, the pattern troubled him. He began asking questions of his overseer, wife, and other enslaved people, trying to understand what made this one woman suddenly interesting. While 3 men attempted to purchase freedom, the other 5 pursued different strategies. William Dvor couldn't purchase Celia himself. His itinerant profession made him unsuitable as an owner under Arkansas law requiring resident owners. But he began inquiring about arrangements possible through river trade connections, people in New Orleans facilitating complex transactions, loopholes in interstate commerce regulations. He also began setting aside larger earnings portions, creating a fund for Celia's benefit once he determined the proper approach. Josiah Frell couldn't purchase Celia without raising questions about why he wanted a house servant from a neighboring plantation when he had adequate staff. Instead, he began visiting Riverbend more frequently, ostensibly discussing cotton markets and river conditions, but actually monitoring Celia's situation, ensuring she didn't reveal their relationship, assessing if other men showed similar interest. His increased presence didn't go unnoticed by the Drurists. Virgil Tucker faced the most constrained situation. As overseer with no property and limited savings, he had neither resources to purchase Celia nor social standing to attempt legal manumission. But Tucker had daily physical proximity and direct authority over Celia's life. He began using that authority to isolate her from other enslaved people, control her movements, ensure she couldn't communicate with anyone threatening his position. He assigned tasks keeping her in the house, restricted Sunday gathering attendance, and watched her with an intensity other enslaved people recognized as dangerous. The situation grew more complex in late October when Celia received a visitor catalyzing the next phase, Delilah Parsons, a free black itinerant seamstress traveling eastern Arkansas. Parsons cultivated a reputation as exceptionally skilled, creating garments matching current Charleston and New Orleans fashions. Her skill gave access to plantation houses. Her free status and focus on feminine concerns made white women comfortable speaking freely. But Parsons served another function. She carried information throughout enslaved and free black communities, connecting people and news across isolating distances. She knew which plantations prepared to sell people, which overseers were brutal, which white men had mixed-race children unacknowledged, which free black people might offer runaway shelter. Her information network was invisible to white oversight but essential to survival. When Parsons arrived at Riverbend to take measurements for Margaret Drury, she spent time with Celia, ostensibly discussing household matters but actually exchanging crucial information. Evidence suggests Parsons helped with the next phase, creating written documents. The letters shaking Phillips County were composed in the last week of October, though the exact process remains mysterious. Celia couldn't write, or had no formal education. But 8 identical letters were created, each in careful script on quality paper unusual for enslaved people. The letters were brief and signed, devastating. Asterisk, the child will come in February. You know what you done, and you know what is right. The woman who carries your child cannot remain property without staining your honor and your soul. Make arrangements before others learn what you already know. Asterisk. The genius lay in ambiguity and implication. It never identified sender, never made explicit threats, never demanded specific actions. But it implied others might learn. Honor required response. Time was limited for men whose social position depended on reputation. The letters created immediate crisis. Delivered on November 2 by unclear process, no postal records, no witness testimony, 8 men throughout Phillips County received identical letters each assumed came from Celia and only he had received. Hamilton Drury received his at breakfast, delivered by a house servant who claimed finding it tucked into the morning newspaper. He read it once, then summoned Virgil Tucker, demanding to know what the overseer knew about Celia's activities, if she had been seen writing, if she had paper and ink access. Tucker, who had received his own letter an hour earlier via different route, claimed ignorance but felt stomach-tightening fear. Josiah Frell received his from a young black boy who knocked at his door, handed him the envelope, and ran away. Frell spent the afternoon in his study, rereading the brief message, trying to determine if it was genuine communication or blackmail from someone who had learned. Samuel Pritchard found his slipped under his office door in Helena. He immediately locked the door, spending an hour considering responses, consequences, legal implications. As a businessman dealing in contracts, he understood the letter created documentary record evidence potentially used against him. Dr. James Rankin received his during a house call north of Helena, handed by an enslaved woman who said a traveling seamstress asked her to deliver it. Rankin read it in someone else's house, then had to compose himself before continuing medical duties. Reverend Thomas Hartwell found his slip between his Bible pages where he would find it preparing Sunday's sermon. He spent the day in prayer, alternating asking God for guidance and convincing himself his actions had been righteous, genuinely caring for Celia's spiritual development, any physical relationship secondary to salvation mission. William Dvor received his aboard the Delta Star docked at Napoleon, Arkansas, 30 miles south of Helena, delivered by a boy who ran onto the boat, handed him the envelope, and disappeared. He read it in his cabin, then immediately calculated available money and arrangements possible. Benjamin Yates received his at home, delivered by an unknown black man who knocked at the back door and handed it to Yates's cook. Reading it, his legal training activated. Someone had created documentary evidence. Identical letters might have been sent to multiple recipients. A scheme of considerable sophistication was in operation. But he also recognized he was implicated, and any investigation would expose his own behavior. The beauty of timing, each received his letter at different locations under different circumstances, making coordination or comparison impossible without revealing to others they had received such a letter. Each man's isolation was reinforced by guilt and exposure fear. Within days, effects manifested visibly throughout Phillips County. The second week of November brought unusually cold weather, frost on cotton fields awaiting final harvest, the Mississippi running gray under overcast skies. But atmospheric chill was nothing compared to tension developing among 8 men each trying to manage a private crisis. Hamilton Drury made the first overtly suspicious move. On November 9, he traveled to Helena specifically to visit Benjamin Yates's law office. He told Yates he considered selling several enslaved people and wanted legal procedure review. Yates, knowing exactly which person Drury concerned, maintained professional composure explaining documentation requirements. But Drury then asked a question making Yates's hands go cold. Was Yates aware of anyone else inquiring about purchasing specific enslaved people from Riverbend? Yates deflected skillfully, citing client confidentiality, but Drury's suspicion was now explicit. As Drury left, Yates sat calculating exposure geometry. If Drury asked these questions, he knew something. If he knew, others might soon know. If others knew, the secrecy structure protecting all 8 would collapse. That same day, Josiah Frell encountered Samuel Pritchard on Helena's main street. Their greeting was cordial, but Frell noticed Pritchard seemed distracted. When Frell mentioned heading to Riverbend to discuss cotton prices with Drury, Pritchard's reaction was oddly intense. He advised Drury seemed stressed lately, perhaps not the best time for business discussions. The comment was strange enough. Frell wondered if Pritchard knew something, if Drury had confided, if the secrecy web was unraveling. The first open conflict occurred November 13. Virgil Tucker, monitoring Celia with increasing paranoia, saw Dr. Rankin arrive for a routine medical inspection. Tucker watched Rankin spend considerably longer examining Celia than medically necessary, and when Rankin emerged, Tucker confronted him. Witnesses reported raised voices, aggressive posturing, Tucker's hand moving toward his pistol. Rankin stood his ground with enough force Tucker backed down. But the confrontation was public. Enslaved people in the yard witnessed it. By evening, word spread throughout the enslaved community and beyond. Hamilton Drury heard from Margaret, who observed from a window and demanded to know why Tucker threatened the doctor. Drury summoned Tucker for explanation. Tucker, trapped between confession and continued secrecy, claimed concern about Rankin spending excessive time with enslaved women, that it seemed improper and potentially problematic. Drury accepted this but filed it mentally alongside other strange behavior. By mid-November, Celia showed visible pregnancy, becoming a topic among white residents. Margaret Drury, her relationship strained by Hamilton's obvious preference for producing sons, asked pointed questions about the pregnancy, who might be the father, if Hamilton knew anything. These questions put Drury in an impossible position, admitting knowledge revealed too much, claiming ignorance made his wife suspect lying. The situation escalated dramatically November 18 when two men arrived at Riverbend with specific intentions regarding Celia. Dr. James Rankin arrived morning carrying medical supplies, stating he needed thorough examination to ensure pregnancy progression. He brought legal documents already signed, transferring funds to Drury for Celia's sale and subsequent manumission, documents prepared by Yates, though Rankin didn't know Yates had his own reasons. Drury refused immediately with forcefulness surprising Rankin. No intention of selling Celia, pregnancy made her more valuable, the doctor's sudden interest strange and inappropriate. Rankin pressed harder, increasing offered price, arguing medical concerns warranted special consideration. Drury's refusal became heated. He finally ordered Rankin off the property. Rankin had barely cleared the gate when Samuel Pritchard arrived with similar mission. Pritchard's approach was more sophisticated, a complex arrangement where a Memphis cotton factor would purchase Celia as part of larger business transaction, avoiding personal interest appearance. He presented it as business opportunity, emphasizing premium price and convenience. Drury's response was explosive. Why was Pritchard suddenly so interested facilitating this woman's sale? Pointed questions about the Memphis factor, who suggested arrangement, if Pritchard spoke with Dr. Rankin. Pritchard, realizing timing catastrophic, attempted graceful retreat, but damage done. Drury now knew multiple men coordinated efforts regarding Celia, suspicions crystallized into certainty. That evening, Drury confronted Celia directly in his study, a private interview leaving no witnesses. What was said remains unknown. But when Celia emerged an hour later, her expression was described by another house servant as calm but cold, like someone who had just won something but couldn't show it. Next day, November 19th, Reverend Thomas Hartwell made a fatal error. He arrived unannounced, claiming needing to speak with Celia about spiritual matters, preparing her soul for motherhood, ensuring child-raised Christian. Margaret Drury, suspicions growing all week, decided to observe personally, positioning herself to hear the conversation. What she heard confirmed worse suspicions. Hartwell's language, though carefully religious surface, carried intimacy and personal concern no minister would have for an enslaved woman without deeper connection. When Hartwell mentioned making arrangements for Celia's future, promising she wouldn't remain enslaved, offering assurances beyond his authority or means, Margaret understood completely. She confronted her husband that evening with specific accusations, multiple men intimate with Celia, now competing to free or purchase her, the entire situation creating scandal-destroying family reputation. Drury attempted deflection, claiming Margaret imagined connections, but she assembled too much evidence. She threatened leaving Riverbend, returning to family in Little Rock, taking daughters and making public statements about his character if he didn't take decisive action. On November 21st, Hamilton Drury decided transforming Celia's scheme into something far more dangerous. He announced Celia would be sold, not to any local buyer, but to a cotton planter in Louisiana Delta, far south of Helena, where she would work field labor until childborn then continue afterward. Sale would happen immediately, within days, before she became too pregnant to travel. This decision, meant to remove conflict source and restore household order, instead triggered crisis among 8 men believing they had stake in Celia's future. Dr. Rankin learned of planned sale through medical network, immediately sending urgent messages to Yates asking legal intervention, injunctions, any mechanism delaying or preventing sale. Yates, caught between professional obligations and personal involvement, drafted documents serving Rankin's purpose but knowing minimal legal standing. Samuel Pritchard heard from business contacts, confronting Drury directly, abandoning business neutrality pretense, demanding reconsideration. The confrontation occurred at Drury's cotton warehouse in Helena, drawing attention from other merchants witnessing two prominent men arguing with intensity suggesting personal rather than business conflict. Reverend Thomas Hartwell, learning of sale, experienced mental collapse. Church members found him sitting in sanctuary weeping openly, talking sin, redemption, divine judgment. He became convinced Celia's sale was divine punishment for his behavior, God testing him, placing her beyond reach. Obvious distress and strange comments created speculation throughout Helena's religious community. Josiah Frell took most direct action. On November 23, 2 days before planned sale, he rode to Riverbend confronting Hamilton Drury face to face. He offered purchasing Celia himself, matching Louisiana planter's price, arguing sense keeping her nearby where condition properly monitored. When Drury refused, Frell made threat crossing dangerous territory, suggesting Drury might not want certain information about personal behavior becoming public, that men in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Drury's response, reaching for pistol. Frell, equally armed, drew his own. For several seconds, two wealthy plantation owners stood in Drury's front room pointing loaded pistols at each other while Margaret screamed for help and enslaved servants fled. Confrontation ended without shots only because Virgil Tucker arrived, physically interposing between them, forcing weapons lowered. Frell left immediately, but incident guaranteed conflict no longer private. Too many witnessed, too many questions would be asked about cause. That same evening, William Dvor arrived unannounced, having steamed up river specifically because sale word reached him in Napoleon. He attempted negotiating with Drury, offering more money than Rankin or Pritchard, suggesting arrangements satisfying Margaret's concerns while keeping Celia in Arkansas. But Drury, exhausted by constant pressure and increasingly suspicious how many men invested in one enslaved woman's fate, refused further negotiation. On November 24, day before scheduled sale, Benjamin Yates did remarkable, legally unprecedented, filing papers with Phillips County Court challenging Drury's right selling Celia to out-of-state buyer, citing obscure Arkansas statute about interstate commerce and enslaved pregnant people. Legal argument was weak, Yates knew, but filing created public record delaying sale and forcing hearing. Hamilton Drury, reading court documents delivered November 25, immediately recognized Yates's name, realizing his own lawyer actively working against his interests. Revelation: Yates involved in scheme surrounding Celia, combined with other evidence multiple men's interest, led Drury to devastating conclusion: the child could have been fathered by any number. Celia manipulated multiple relationships simultaneously. He had been played for fool along with several prominent citizens. His rage found target most vulnerable, Virgil Tucker, overseer with authority over Celia, who apparently failed preventing scheme. Evening November 25, Drury dismissed Tucker effective immediately, ordering him leave Riverbend before morning. Tucker's response triggered final cascade, bringing Celia's scheme to climax. Rather than accept dismissal quietly, Tucker went to quarters where enslaved people lived, talking loudly publicly about what he knew regarding Celia and multiple white men intimate with her. He named names, described encounters, revealed secret details. Motivation was revenge against Drury for firing, but effect transformed private knowledge held by enslaved community into public testimony white society could no longer ignore. By dawn November 26, everyone at Riverbend knew what Tucker revealed. By midday, word spread neighboring plantations. By evening, story reached Helena, circulating through merchant establishments, church gatherings, social clubs, growing more elaborate, scandalous each retelling. The 8 men believing each held private secret now faced public exposure, mutual revelation, terrifying knowledge, all manipulated by enslaved women who should have been powerless but turned instruments of power against them. Crisis no longer containable. Question: what next? Just when situation seemed couldn't become more volatile, word reached Riverbend. One of 8 men took action far more dramatic than anticipated. The news arrived early morning November 27, carried by steamboat crewmen witnessing event firsthand. William Dvor had disappeared. The Delta Star remained docked at Helena, cargo half-loaded, crew waiting for captain never returning from brief Riverbend visit. Dvor last seen evening November 26 walking River Road toward Helena, carrying satchel witnesses later realized contained all savings and personal documents. He vanished, abandoning livelihood, boat, entire Arkansas existence without explanation. For other 7, Dvor's disappearance stark demonstration exposure cost. Men could lose everything, forced flee completely, watch entire life collapse from association with one enslaved woman's scheme. Realization crystallized stakes ways abstract fear never could. But Dvor's flight also removed one player from already complex situation. Nature abhors vacuum. By November 28, remaining 7 forced making decisions, avoiding, taking positions, hoping, defer, choosing between continued concealment and coordinated response. Benjamin Yates, whose legal filing temporarily blocked sale, found himself leading group never intended joining. For others, Dr. Rankin, Samuel Pritchard, Reverend Hartwell, even Josiah Frell, approached separately over 2 days, each ostensibly seeking legal advice but actually probing understand who else involved, strategies protecting all. Yates, trained identifying patterns, gradually assembled complete picture, 8 men including himself, 1 woman, 1 claimed pregnancy, multiple freedom purchase attempts, scheme extraordinary sophistication playing each specific vulnerability, now with Tucker's public testimony and Dvor flight, likelihood exposure destroying careers, marriages, reputations. Evening November 29, Yates did unprecedented, sending discreet messages to Rankin, Pritchard, Hartwell, Frell requesting private meeting at law office after business hours. He included Hamilton Drury, presenting legal consultation about court challenge to Celia's sale. Virgil Tucker, unemployed bidder, not invited, proving significant. 6 men gathered Yates's office evening November 30. Meeting leaving no official record but later reconstructed participants' private correspondence must have been extraordinary moment collective realization, each discovering others new socially professionally implicated same scheme. Silence as they looked recognizing shared guilt mutual vulnerability reportedly lasted minutes. Yates, convener with most experience managing complex negotiations, spoke first. He laid out understanding. Celia somehow convinced multiple men fathered her child, extracted promises, created legal documents, orchestrated situation maintaining individual secrecy no longer possible because too many acting conflicting agendas. He noted Tucker's testimony, delivered from spite, accurate enough corroborated other enslaved people at Riverbend. He observed Dvor flight suggested magnitude consequences each might face if situation fully public. Then proposed solution pragmatic morally bankrupt, collective silence purchased through collective action. If all 6 agreed pooling resources, could purchase Celia from Drury price inflated enough satisfying wounded pride Margaret's demands removal. Could arrange relocation far from Phillips County under circumstances not punitive. Could ensure Tucker paid enough keeping silent. Most importantly, could present unified front denial if questions raised, each man vouching other's character, creating wall respectability making accusations implausible. Proposal brilliant corruption, transformed individual guilt into collective protection, made each safety-dependent defending others, used very power structures Phillips County society concealing truth. Hamilton Drury agreed immediately, seeing opportunity profiting wife's moral outrage while removing scandal source. Samuel Pritchard agreed business logic appealing, maintaining cotton factor relationships requiring avoiding public controversy. Dr. Rankin agreed genuinely wanting Celia freed from Drury's ownership, seeing only practical path. Reverend Hartwell agreed alternative acknowledging publicly violating every principle preached. Only Josiah Frell hesitated. He argued simply relocating Celia didn't address fundamental issue her condition, child she carried, paternity undetermined. Suggested perhaps one actually take responsibility, purchase freedom properly, ensure she and child protection. Other men's response revealed limits concern, pointed out individual taking such action implicitly admitting paternity, marking himself different sacrificing reputation uncertain benefit. Better maintaining collective deniability ensuring Celia provided without any specifically identified responsible. Meeting concluded agreement, each contribute funds proportional means, Drury accept $1,200 for Celia, far above market value, Yates arrange sale contact Missouri subsequently manumitting, creating legal distance, Tucker received $200 leaving Arkansas never speaking publicly. Total cost split 6 manageable all, cheap compared potential exposure cost. But meeting excluded two crucial participants, Celia herself and Virgil Tucker, dismissed overseer whose bitterness exclusion proving fatal carefully constructed plan. Tucker learned about meeting through information networks white people consistently underestimated. Enslaved men working building Yates's office observed unusual evening gathering, reported others, information reaching Tucker through channels designed in visible white observation. Tucker understood immediately, wealthy men closing ranks protecting each other, leaving him excluded protection financial settlement. Night December 1st, Tucker broke into Yates's law office stealing documents files related Celia's case, copies purchase offers Rankin Pritchard, court filing challenging sale, correspondence participants, Yates's own notes coordinated strategy. Tucker's theft calculated acquisition evidence destroying men excluded him. Tucker's plan, using stolen documents extracting payment far larger $200 offered. Threaten public exposure backed documentary proof unless each paid separately substantially. Blackmail. But Tucker calculated former authority over enslaved people, willingness violence, position white men protecting serious consequences even scheme discovered. He was wrong. December 3rd, Tucker approached Samuel Pritchard Cotton Factor's office Helena, presenting document copies demanding $1,000 return continued silence. Pritchard, terrified material evidence displayed, promised gathering funds arranging meet following evening warehouse near river sometimes conducted business. Pritchard immediately contacted other five describing threat. Group reconvened hurriedly, this time Drury's Riverbend Plantation rather town, discussing options. Conversation, later reconstructed fragmentary evidence one participant's guilty conscience, reveals how quickly respected citizens contemplate extreme solutions threatened exposure. Options discussed, paying Tucker's demands likely leading escalating extortion, arresting Tucker theft requiring explaining documents stolen why existed, intimidating Tucker leaving Arkansas immediately might not work given desperation. According later testimony, Josiah Frell suggested most direct solution, noting Tucker no family Arkansas, no employer missing, no social position prompting investigation if disappeared. What happened next remains disputed exact details, but outcome grimly certain. Evening December 4th, Virgil Tucker went warehouse expecting collect payment Samuel Pritchard. Found 3 days later Mississippi River, body caught against fallen tree 15 miles south Helena. County coroner, owing political favor several prominent planters, ruled death accidental drowning, suggesting Tucker drinking Fell River. No stolen documents recovered. Investigation concluded within days. Virgil Tucker buried unmarked grave, matter officially closed. But Tucker's death, whether murder less direct removal, fundamentally changed nature begun Celia's scheme. She manipulated powerful men, created conflict exposure, nearly achieved freedom intelligence careful planning. But men manipulated possessed power extending beyond legal mechanisms, power including violence other methods failed. December 8th, Hamilton Drury informed Celia being sold. Buyer identified Cotton Factor Missouri, price $1,200, transaction completely legal proper. Celia would travel upriver immediately before winter weather made passage impossible. No discussion manumission, freedom promise, acknowledgement arrangement beyond simple sale. Celia understood immediately, 8 men discovered each other, coordinated response, neutralized her leverage acting collectively rather individually. Her scheme, depending isolation competing individual interests, failed once men unified. Tucker disappearance sent unmistakable message about what happened people threatening Phillips County respectable citizens exposure. December 10, 1857, Celia placed aboard steamboat headed upriver Missouri. She carried small bundle possessions, visibly advanced pregnancy, knowledge come closer freedom own efforts than most enslaved managed, only snatched away same collective power holding millions bondage. Historical record becomes fragmented after Phillips County departure. Missouri documents show purchase enslaved woman matching Celia's description Gerard Wickham, legitimate Cotton Factor business relationships Arkansas planters. But Wickham's records also show woman manumitted February 1858, shortly after giving birth daughter, subsequently left Missouri unknown destination. Whether manumission represented delayed fulfillment Phillips County men's original agreement, Wickham moved Celia's situation freeing independently, or Celia managed negotiating freedom through yet another scheme remains unknown. Paper trail ends manumission document. Celia disappears historical records entirely. The 8 men Phillips County drawn Celia's web experienced varied fates reflecting different involvement. Visibility scandal never quite public. Hamilton Drury continued operating Riverbend Plantation until death 1866, shortly Civil War conclusion. Marriage Margaret survived never recovered earlier closeness. Never acknowledged relationship Celia, successfully maintaining victim enslaved woman manipulation other men inappropriate interest property. Daughters married respectably, family reputation remained intact withstand post-war social disruptions. Josiah Frell sold Plantation 1859 relocated Texas, citing business opportunities actually fleeing memories complications Phillips County. Died there 1871 childless despite 3 marriages, leaving estate church organization probably never knew events 1857. Samuel Pritchard's cotton factor business collapsed 1861 war disrupting river commerce. Tried rebuilding post-war never regained previous success. Wife's family connections dissolved Memphis relatives lost wealth reconstruction. Died 1878 financially comfortable politically irrelevant, never achieving ambitions driven him. Dr. James Rankin continued practicing medicine Phillips County until death 1883. Never remarried, never mentioned Celia surviving correspondence, maintained reputation competent physician certain sadness people attributed dead wife rather guilty conscience. Reverend Thomas Hartwell experienced mental breakdown 1859 forcing leave congregation. Returned Virginia living relatives apparently never preached again. Death 1865 attributed melancholia, diagnosis likely reflecting severe depression guilt. William Dvore never returned Arkansas. Rumors placed New Orleans then California, no confirmed sighting documented. Delta Star eventually sold pay debts, Dvore's name disappeared steamboat registries. Successfully erased entire previous existence, most complete escape any 8 managed. Benjamin Yates continued practicing law Phillips County throughout war reconstruction. Destroyed documents related Celia's case shortly departure, eliminating evidence later problematic. Died 1889 respected successful, taking secrets grave. Only private letter found after death written cousin 1880 contained acknowledgement, *I once participated matter troubles conscience still, though convinced myself time acted properly. We skilled constructing justifications behavior no wrong, *. Virgil Tucker, almost nothing remained. No family memorialize, no property pass, no reputation defend after death. Drowning circumstances never seriously questioned, grave eventually lost small cemetery buried fell disrepair. Bin tool planter power casually discarded inconvenient. Enslaved community Riverbend throughout Phillips County preserved own version story, passing oral tradition white people never heard. Account Celia remembered not victim but strategist nearly defeating system enslaving her, turned powerful men against each other, demonstrated intelligence careful planning shake structures seeming unbreakable. Fact ultimately didn't escape slavery through scheme mattered less than tried, fought using only weapons available, forced 8 white men reveal hypocrisy fear. Child Celia carried, born February 1858 Missouri records, recorded female named Sarah. Beyond notation, no information survives. Whether Sarah grew free, ever knew mother's history, survived infancy era mortality high all children especially born newly freed women without resources remains unknown. Historical significance Celia's story extends beyond individual facts. Reveals enslaved people even most oppressive circumstances found ways resist manipulate challenge oppressors. Demonstrates intelligence strategy tools survival resistance leaving obvious marks historical records no less real invisibility. Shows white Southern society deepest fears miscegenation, lost control, humanity agency enslaved people grounded accurate recognition reality system desperately denied. Story also reveals length powerful men go protecting reputations maintaining social order, probable murder Virgil Tucker, coordinated deception Celia's sale manumission, destruction documentary evidence, collective silence maintained decades afterward demonstrate Southern society built not just explicit violence but sophisticated mechanisms concealment collective denial. Phillips County continued major cotton-producing region until Civil War disrupted slave labor system made production possible. War brought massive changes, enslaved people freed themselves fleeing Union lines, plantations abandoned destroyed, cotton economy collapsed. But habits secrecy, patterns exploitation, willingness respectable citizens coordinate protecting interests survived war-shaped Reconstruction beyond. Decades after 1857, Phillips County never publicly acknowledged story Celia 8 men. No newspaper reported, no court records preserved, no official history mentioned. Silence so complete story would have entirely lost. Not scattered documents survived accidentally, private letters descendants didn't destroy, plantation ledgers recording unusual transactions without explaining, oral traditions maintained descendants enslaved people remembered ancestors told. Story raises questions no comfortable answers. How many similar schemes attempted enslaved women leaving no trace historical record? How often powerful men coordinated concealing exploitation maintaining appearances? How much think no slavery actually carefully constructed fiction designed hiding uncomfortable truths? Fact 8 white men 1 Arkansas County simultaneously manipulated 1 enslaved woman suggests manipulation possible, power imbalance slavery never absolute masters wanted believe, intelligence strategy weapons even physical resistance impossible. But fact 8 men ultimately succeeded silencing Celia, removing Phillips County, eliminating evidence behavior, reminds individual resistance no matter brilliant had limits only systemic change overcome. Celia's freedom, if achieved, came price exile everyone known, permanent separation community, erasure story official memory. Child-born situation, Sarah, embodies ambiguity tragedy entire episode, both product exploitation potentially path freedom, both evidence white men's violations symbol enslaved women's determination survive create meaning horror, carried body question haunting Southern society, what meant child white father enslaved mother system denying humanity both relationship offspring. These questions resonate far beyond Phillips County, Arkansas 1857. Speak fundamental nature power, resistance, justice, memory. Remind history always more complex official records suggest, people left no documents no less intelligent strategic whose papers fill archives, silence historical record often indicates not absence events but successful concealment. What think story? Believe Celia ultimately achieved freedom. Or system enslaving maintained control even after left Arkansas. How honor intelligence courage people resistance left almost no trace official records. Leave thoughts comments below. This story represents countless similar stories never preserved, acknowledged, given weight deserved understanding American history. If narrative moved, made think differently resistance power, subscribe Liturgy of Fear. Hit notification bell never miss stories like this. Share video someone needs here. These stories matter. These voices, silent official records, deserve heard. Thank you listening. See next exploration America's hidden history.